On our broadcast tonight, the big one hits Japan, a massive history-making earthquake, one of the largest ever measured. And it triggers a massive tsunami all the way to the U.S. Tonight, we're watching the rising death toll, a nuclear plant in trouble. The aftershocks continue. The world is watching Japan, and our coverage begins now.
Disaster in Japan. This is a special edition of NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
And a special good evening to our viewers on the West Coast tonight. As you know by now, to your west, across the Pacific, the nation of Japan has suffered a colossal, historic earthquake that has caused massive damage, massive loss of life, and sent ocean waters racing over land. The big quake, magnitude 8.9, it struck at 2:46 p.m. It was centered 78 miles offshore. While Tokyo swayed and shook and bounced for minutes on end, sending millions into shelter, Sendai was the closest population center. It has been devastated. The loss of life, officially listed as hundreds, no doubt goes into the thousands, as thousands are missing. The quake then triggered a tsunami. Water upwards of 30 feet high in places swamped the Japanese shoreline, moving faster than people or cars could outrun it. Then it headed out across the Pacific Ocean to the east, traveling at times at the speed of a jet airliner. The original quake was big enough to move the largest island of Japan 8 feet further to the east. The aftershocks have not stopped. A second big quake struck on land late today, U.S. time. Kaori Njoji is the veteran CNBC Tokyo bureau chief. She starts off our coverage. And Kaori, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Japan is waking up to a morning Saturday here like no other. The citizens of this country have long been accustomed to earthquakes, but what they saw 18 hours ago as this massive earthquake struck was like nothing they have seen before. The quake hit at 2:46 in the afternoon, Tokyo time, in the middle of what witnesses called a beautiful, calm day. Terrified business workers scrambled to safety when the tremors hit. Debris and office equipment falling everywhere. In the streets, chaos as residents tried to dodge bricks and glass crashing to the ground. Japan is no stranger to earthquakes, with reinforced building designs like nowhere else in the world. But this one was a monster, measuring a magnitude of 8.9, one of the strongest in the country's history. An American university professor in Tokyo on business told us the tremors were relentless.
The shaking got worse and worse. I don't know exactly how long it lasted. It seemed like it went on forever.
The country's Prime Minister, Naoto Kan, immediately activated an emergency response plan. After the shaking came the warning. And the wave, a chilling preview of the disaster to come. The target, the city of Sendai, some 200 miles northeast of Tokyo. Hundreds are reported missing there. An unbelievable sight, the force of the swirling water sucking boats into its center. Reports of at least one vessel missing with 100 people aboard. The tsunami hit with incredible force, the sludge sweeping away everything in its path. This wall of water and mud, some 30 feet high, washed across the low-lying coastal areas. Entire towns swept away, thick and brown, strewn with debris. Fast-moving farmlands quickly disappeared. Entire major roads, bridges and homes, gone in a matter of minutes. The airport at Sendai was completely destroyed. Workers and others scrambled onto rooftops trying to stay above the mud. A huge fire in an oil refinery near Tokyo continues to burn. At least 80 other massive fires are still burning along the coastline after the quake cut off gas lines, causing a series of explosions leaving homes and businesses ablaze. Power is out throughout parts of the country, and mass transit is down. In some places, trains derailed. Tonight, evacuations are underway for miles around this nuclear power plant in Fukushima. Officials say the cooling system failed during the jolt, Authorities now say that radiation levels have surged outside the plant. With daybreak here, the search for dead and injured of this disaster is just beginning. Not to mention the cleanup, which will likely take months, if not years. Although most of the public transportation here in the capital, Tokyo, has resumed this morning, transportation communication to the northeast region has been sporadic. Public broadcaster NHK reporting that at least more than 1,000 people have been either dead or missing, and the toll continues to mount. Brian?
Ori and Joji, and again, what is an otherwise beautiful Saturday morning across Japan. Tonight, our counterparts in Japanese television news are anchoring their broadcasts wearing hard hats because of falling debris in their newsrooms and studios. But Japanese television also played a crucial role in this disaster, broadcasting 30 seconds advance warning and blanket coverage since the opening moments of the quake. Our NBC News Tokyo Bureau Chief Arata Yamamoto continues our coverage. And Arata, I heard you in the middle of the night U.S. time on MSNBC's live coverage say you were watching television, you got notice, which is very rare, enough time, 30 seconds, to take cover or leave structures for some people.
That's right, Brian. We were watching the parliamentary session, and on the screen flashed a warning saying that a big earthquake was hitting Japan. And shortly after that, 30 seconds afterwards, we started to feel the shake. The shake was it got to be so big that you couldn't stand without losing your balance.
It's hard to see a beautiful sunny day on the side street where we've set up shop, but is the rest of the country in kind of a state of suspended animation? I've seen pictures of the bullet train just frozen in place on its tracks.
Yeah, that's correct. People are still stranded in train stations, even here in Tokyo. People are still dazed, especially since we don't know the full scale of the damage that this tsunami earthquake has caused.
And Arata, in Tokyo itself, we saw buildings absolutely swaying back and forth. The damage, of course, much less in the city than it is in the agricultural zone to the north, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. But the buildings did shake quite a bit here.
Our bureau chief in Tokyo, Arata Yamamoto, thanks. The issue of nuclear safety emerged early on in this story, and it grew more ominous as we look at these daytime pictures just into us from Sendai. As the day went on and we learned more about the destruction, specifically the reports that 2 nuclear plants north of Tokyo are in trouble. Our chief environmental correspondent, Ann Thompson, with us, has more on this story from our London bureau. Ann, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. For the first time, Japan declared an atomic emergency at 2 nuclear power plants, and Japanese officials say they have lost control of 2 reactors. The fear is those reactors could be headed for a meltdown. The plants are in Fukushima, about 150 miles north of Tokyo, where some 30 million people live, and 50 miles from Sendai, home to 1 million. Officials ordered residents within a 6-mile area of the plants to evacuate. The reactors in question are designed by General Electric, one of the part owners of NBC Universal. This problem started with a power outage caused by the quake, causing the cooling systems in some of the reactors to fail. And those systems send water to lower the temperature of the fuel. There should be 2 backup systems, but those apparently weren't working. And if the cooling system is interrupted, the fuel can overheat, melt, and release a large amount of radioactivity. There are also reports tonight that radiation levels inside one of those reactors is 1,000 times higher than normal levels. Outside, it's 8 times higher. Brian?
Our thanks to Ann Thompson on this emerging nuclear angle. Just to recap, an earthquake on the other side of the world, powerful enough to make seismographs jump across the United States, powerful enough to send a wave across the Pacific Ocean. We now want to take a look at the dynamic that creates that kind of energy. We have an explainer tonight from NBC's Tom Costello in Washington. Tom, good evening.
Hi, Brian. This earthquake occurred along what is known as the Pacific Ring of Fire. That is a 25,000-mile string of volcanic and seismic activity. In fact, 90% of the world's earthquakes and 80% of the tsunamis happen within this ring of fire. The most recent one, of course, was in Christchurch, New Zealand, right here just last month. But Japan sits well to the north, and it sits right in kind of a trifecta, if you will, an intersection of three plates, the Eurasian plate as well as the Philippine plate and the Pacific plate. Today's earthquake was right about there, 80 miles offshore, and the edge of the Pacific plate in the middle got wedged, it got caught underneath the Eurasian plate on which Japan sits. That is called subduction. And that grinding plate action really pushes up the ocean floor, which can generate, in the view of many, kind of a shock wave. And that shock wave then ripples out. It creates this actual tsunami traveling at 500 miles per hour. The tsunami then travels towards the shoreline. It hits the continental shelf right there. That causes the waves to bunch up and they get much higher. So then the wave comes across and it hits landfall and it can be absolutely devastating. We have some wave projection images from NOAA showing the wave heights. And the black image right there, that is off the coast of Japan, where the waves were the highest, 30 feet. The tsunami then travels east, 500 miles per hour. Hawaii is about 3,800 miles or so away, and the waves there were 7 to 8 feet high, minimal damage. And then we saw the waves continue to move on to the Pacific coast of the United States. Brian?
Tom Costello in Washington, thanks. Japan may be the most prepared nation on Earth. This is hardly their first major earthquake, but no two are alike. And this one gives the experts now a lot to study. And, of course, it's still going. Hundreds of aftershocks and another separate quake this afternoon. Among those experts, Dr. Lucy Jones, seismologist at the U.S. Geological Survey. And Dr. Jones, how long does it take your instruments to reflect a shaker like this after the first shake in Tokyo?
It's actually only a matter of seconds to minutes. The earthquake waves actually travel at 2 miles a second around the world, and the USGS system was able to look at the location of the earthquake within a matter of about 10 minutes after the event. And
what do you think? What do you think they're in for now in the next few hours and days in Japan?
Well, I think it's this overall disruption to their whole social system. There's going to be deaths coming. I mean, there's people have already been found. There are going to be more to find. And I think the next day or so is going to be really critical on that issue. The other important issue for them is getting the fires under control, and also I think the nuclear systems. Japan has a long history of fire following earthquake that's been very devastating. In 1923, the city of Tokyo was destroyed with 150,000 dead because of primarily the fire after a big earthquake. So that's going to be part of whether or not how they're going to be able to keep on going, is be able to fight the fires, be able to comprehend the dead, start mobilizing help, and maintaining communications and helping people feel supported as they go through this.
And doing all of that, as the instruments behind you show, the earth continues to shake beneath their feet. Dr. Lucy Jones, seismologist with USGS Caltech, thank you very much for being with us tonight. The tsunami that started in Japan ended up hours later slapping against the west coast of the United States, beginning with the Hawaiian island chain. NBC's Miguel Almaguer is in Santa Cruz, California tonight. Miguel, good evening.
Brian, good evening. A 25-year-old California man is dead tonight, swept out to sea by a tsunami surge near the Oregon border. And late tonight, we have word that 4 counties here in California are under a state of emergency. In Santa Cruz, powerful currents capsized 6 boats, knocked others on their side, and tossed some into the harbor. The cleanup still underway. 6 to 7 foot waves also hit the small Oregon coastal city of Seaside 9 hours after the earthquake. Tsunami sirens and reverse 911 calls jolted many out of bed early this morning as evacuations were ordered in Oregon and Washington state, but it was in Hawaii that was hit first. Sirens also sent residents scrambling to higher ground. Homes and cars were destroyed, but again, Brian, late tonight, word out of California, 4 counties are still under a state of emergency. Brian.
Miguel Almaguer live in Santa Cruz as we update this story for our West Coast viewers tonight. Miguel, thanks. When we come back, our coverage continues with the story from Southern California on the team being ready to go to Japan. We said this earlier, Japan may be the most prepared nation on earth for earthquakes. They drill constantly, like a lot of places in known earthquake zones, like California, where they have experience in this and where they're sending their top flight team across the Pacific to Japan. George Lewis standing by for us at the LA County Search and Rescue Team headquarters. George, good evening.
Yes, good evening, Brian. Behind me, members of the LA County Fire Department Search and Rescue Team getting ready to deploy to Japan. Many of these people just got back from the earthquake in New Zealand. In the past, they've served at the earthquake in Haiti. And these are the same people who will have to rescue Californians in future quakes here. 1 out of 5 Californians practice for the big one every year. A massive drill called the Great Shakeout, involving school kids, hospitals, first responders. So, how well prepared is California?
Obviously, we've got a long way to go. There are 4 out of 5 people approximately that aren't participating as far as we know.
Even as the death toll mounts in Japan, U.S. experts say the Japanese earthquake early warning networks alerted people to take cover, saving lives, a capability we lack.
We're years away from having that in California or in the U.S.
The thing that most worries scientists is the threat of a huge earthquake along the southern end of the San Andreas Fault. California faces a 94% probability of a magnitude 7 or greater quake in the next 30 years. In one scenario, a quake measuring magnitude 7.8 would leave 1,800 people dead, would sever vital utility and transportation lifelines, and cause billions of dollars in damage. And, as the Los Angeles County Fire Search and Rescue Team learned recently in New Zealand, an earthquake doesn't have to be the big one to be deadly. The Christchurch quake, magnitude 6.3, was close to the surface, the ground shaking violent.
Buildings resemble Los Angeles, California. There are some buildings that right next to buildings that are down that have survived the earthquake.
A warning for Californians. Even with building codes that focus on seismic safety, many structures are still no match for violent quakes. Among those heading to Japan, dog teams to detect people buried beneath the rubble, and also water rescue experts. That's because the tsunami caused so much flooding. Brian?
George Lewis with the update from LA County. George, thanks. As we continue for the West Coast tonight, an update when we come back on U.S. military preparations and the relief effort. Currently in port in Singapore, U.S. Navy amphibious helicopter carrier Blue Ridge getting loaded up with relief supplies. It'll be heading to Japan tomorrow. The Pentagon, by order of President Obama, sending a lot of assets, including the aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan, again, mostly for helicopter lift capacity. And if you want to help, for more on the relief effort and how you can be of assistance, there's information tonight on our website, nightly.msnbc.com. Some other news now. We got an update today on the condition of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. The hospital in Houston says she continues to make significant progress. Her breathing tube was removed a few days ago. She is speaking now in full sentences, and her movement is improving. She has been told what happened to her, but not about the others who were shot in Tucson that day in January. At a news conference today, President Obama spoke about the civil war in Libya, saying he hasn't taken any options off the table. Also today, we got a first look at the devastation inside the strategic city of Zawiya after a brutal battle in which Gaddafi's forces have now regained control. The rebels lost the city, but they insist they will push on in their effort. When we come back here tonight, the video we found that tells the story of what happened as it was happening in Japan. We here have been watching hours of coverage of the earthquake in Japan, personal stories, web video, and tonight we've compiled a look at what it was like to live through, to witness it, and to survive the violent shaking that lasted several minutes and destroyed so much.
Unreal.
There are constant sirens in the city. The shaking got worse and worse.
I kind of had to fall to my knees and just kind of hold on tight.
I don't know exactly how long it lasted. It seemed like it went on forever.
It's just kind of a cold, hard fear, where I didn't have an exit plan.
You could see skyscrapers all around, swaying more or less like trees in the wind.
Everyone in Tokyo has been severely rattled. They have felt the ground turn very wobbly on them.
The country's most powerful earthquake on record, generating massive tsunami waves along broad areas of the Pacific coast. 200 to 300 unidentified bodies have been found. The ship with about 100 people on board has been swept away.
We started to see those giant oil plumes come up. It was quite scary.
People seem like they're in a bit of a state of shock.
Nothing compares to what happened today. This is just almost impossible to describe.
The monumental disaster in Japan. That is our broadcast for this Friday night and for this week. Thank you for being here with us. Stay with NBC News and MSNBC for the latest from Japan. More tonight on Dateline and on your late local news. And tomorrow night, our continuing live coverage with Lester Holt, who is right now traveling to the region. I'm Brian Williams. We'll look for you right back here Monday night. Good night.